Hello and welcome. In this session we're going to look at the concept of polyrhythms and what polyrhythms are and a framework for analysing, building and learning to play them. So what essentially is a polyrhythm? It's basically two competing rhythms playing together, not necessarily derived from the same meter. So to give you an example, we're just going to play this one that's on the screen at the moment. So this is a 5/3 pattern. The time signature of the bar is 5/4 and you'll hear a bass drum sound playing that 5 beats per bar, and then we have the snare drum playing the 3 parts or the 3 beats against that 5 meter. So let's have a listen to see what it sounds like. So we have 5 beats playing in that bar and 3 beats playing against it, occupying the same space. So to put polyrhythms together, there's a little trick you can use to build a common framework between the two rhythms to derive how they sort of interact with each other. So to do that, we'll switch to a diagram. Okay, so we're going to start with a pretty simple one. We're going to start with 2/3. So in order to build a framework to see how this works together, the first thing to do is just take a look at the 2 meters that you're using. So 2 and 3, multiply those 2 together, which gives you sort of a common pulse or a common grid that those polyrhythms can work against. Next, what we'll do is we'll just create a little grid of 6 dots to indicate the 6 pulses, and we'll number those. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now on my top line, I want to be placing 2 evenly spaced beats to represent the 2 meter, so this one here. So I'm going to place those at beat 1 and beat 4. And the reason for that is you'll see that each one of those pulses, or each one of those beats should I say, operates across 3 pulses in our total grid. If we take a look at the bottom one, we want to be placing 3 evenly spaced notes that again fits across that grid of 6. So we're going to place that at 1, 3, and 5 for the reason that if we take a look at each of those, you'll see they operate over 2 pulses. So each of those beats has the 2 pulses. So when we put those together onto a stave, we'll do the same thing that we did with our opening introduction and play this with a little drum rhythm. So we'll switch back to the stave to see how this works and how it sounds. Okay, so to keep this simple, what I've done is I've placed this rhythm into the time signature of 6/4. The 6 represents the 6 pulses that we identified on the diagram when we multiplied the 2 and the 3 to give us the 6 pulses. And you can see that I have a hi-hat sound, which is going to be playing just a pulse for us to hear those 6 beats. So the hi-hat sound is a... The 3 beats are going to be played by the bass drum, and the 2 beats are going to be played by the snare drum. So as we count through this, you should be able to count the 6 pulses and see where each of those corresponding rhythms lies. As you can see, it relates directly back to that diagram that we played before. Okay, so there's a 6-beat count in just to get us filling the pulse first. And then as you go through, see if you can count each of the parts as we go. Okay, so as you can see, the bass drum is playing 3 evenly spaced notes, the snare drum playing the 2. Okay, so we're going to look at this again. I'm going to count the timing of each of these parts. I'm going to let it go for a couple of bars just to settle into the rhythm, and then I'm going to count the snare part, but I'll count it in terms of its meter. So in other words, just be counting 1 and 2. I'll then switch over to counting the bass drum part, where I'll be counting in 3. Okay, so let's have a listen to this. Now the 2 part, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now the bass drum, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So as you can see, we can see how these things fit together, and we should also be able to count them individually. The whole point is to be able to count one of the feels, count the 2 or count the 3, and feel how the other one sits around that count. If we take a look at an example where I've now placed this into 3/4, so now the primary meter of the 2 meters we're looking at is the 3, and the snare drum part is simply playing its 2 against it. Very similar to the previous example, but putting it in a time signature where one of the meters dictates the time signature instead of finding a common signature that works for both. Let's have a listen. Okay, that's how that works if we have a 3 bass. We can do the same thing. This time I've now set this on the bass of 2. So the time signature now is 2/4. So our bass drum is now playing the 2 rhythm with the snare drum playing the 3 against it. There's 2 bars of counting here just to get us a little bit settled. Okay, let's have a listen. Okay, so that's how our 2 against 3 works. After a while, what you're hearing is the resultant rhythm, that da da ga da 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 ga da 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 ga da. If you can hear the resulting rhythm of these things, it makes them a lot easier to play. Okay, let's move on to a slightly more complex example. So in here, we have 3 against 4. Now I've done the same trick that I did on the diagram before. So what I've done here is I've placed a pulse of 12 across the top, because if we take our 3 and multiply it by a 4, we get a common pulse framework of 12. Just to make things a little bit easier to read here, you'll see I've just denoted 10 at this point, and then just 1 and 2, which is of course the 11 and 12 in the bar. Okay, let's have a listen to this. So we're counting through the 12 pulses, and you can see that each of the parts, the snare drum part has 3 beats evenly spaced, the bass drum part has 4 beats evenly spaced. And again, we're trying to listen to how they interact with each other. Okay, let's take a listen. Okay, so here's the same example, but what I've done this time is I've taken out the hi-hat part, so we no longer hear those 12 pulses, and we're just hearing the 2 rhythms against each other. What we're trying to do is hear the resulting rhythm out of the 2. It does make it a lot easier to play if you can start to hear these. I'll let it go for a couple of bars, and then I'm going to start counting each part. So I'll start off by counting the snare drum part, or the bit that's metered in 3, and then I'll count the bass drum part, which is metered in 4. Okay, so let's have a listen. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So as you can see, we should be able to count each of these parts. That's pretty important to be able to have a relationship with each of the rhythms. When you get to use these in a musical context, one of these 2 rhythms is generally going to be the meter. So it's either going to be, for example, the 4 part, and you'll be in 4/4 playing 3 against it, or you might be in 3/4 playing 4 against it. Of course, we can also break these down into smaller sections. So you might have, for example, 4 16th notes in one beat operating against the 16th note triplet that goes against that, or should I say the 8th note triplet, I beg your pardon, that goes against that. Okay, let's look at another example. So this is 4 against 5. We've done the same thing. We've multiplied the 4 by 5 and we've identified 20 pulses. And you'll see that with the hi-hat across the top, the 20 pulses. And then the snare drum part is playing the 4. The bass drum part is playing the 5. Okay, so let's have a listen to what this sounds like. Okay, so there's how it sits against the 20 framework. So again, if I do the same thing and take the framework out and speed it up a little bit, again, I'm going to let this settle for a couple of bars, and then I'm going to count the 4 part and then switch over to counting the 5. One, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so again, we want to be able to feel either one of those and feel how the other rhythm sits against it. And again, if you can hear the resultant rhythm, that da, da 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 da. If you can start to hear those resultant rhythms, again, it makes it a lot easier to deal with. Okay, so far all the ones we've looked at have looked at consecutive rhythms. So for example, 2 against 3 or 3 against 4. So here's one where we've got a little bit of a break in it. So now we're doing 3 against 5. Same conditions apply as before though, just multiply the two numbers together to give you your common pulse framework, which is 15 in this case. So let's have a listen to what this sounds like. Okay, now this is the example we started with right at the beginning of the video, by the way. Okay, so here's the same thing. We've taken the hi-hat pulses out and we've sped it up again so we can hear the resultant rhythm a little bit more clearly. Same thing, I'm going to let it play for a couple of bars and then I'm going to start counting each part. So I'll begin with the 3 and then switch over to the 5. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's a way of basically being able to build polyrhythms. So what you should be doing when you're practicing these, a good way of doing this is to try and tap with either hand. I teach drums, and this is one of the things I do with my students, where we might be playing one rhythm on the ride cymbal, for example, and another rhythm on the snare drum. But you can do it just tapping on your legs. So play one rhythm with the right hand, one rhythm with the left hand. Listen for the resultant rhythm. Take it really slowly and draw up these frameworks if you need to. So as I say, if you were going to work on the 4 against 5, work on that 20. Be thinking as you're going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and so on and so on. So you just need to build them up slowly and start to get that resultant rhythm into your head. So what's the advantage of learning to play polyrhythms? They're not the kinds of things that you find in lots and lots of music, especially commercial music, but for music from other parts of the world, gamelan music and certain African motifs and things like that, you'll find this polyrhythmic idea in a lot of that type of music. What I find it does do though is it generally strengthens your overall time feel. I've got another video where I talk about subdividing beats by combinations that we don't use so often. For example, we would generally subdivide beats into 8th notes or triplets or 16th notes or 16th note triplets. We don't generally do things like subdivide by things like 5 and 7, for example, but we can do, and it's actually a good exercise to do. I've found certainly with a lot of my students, working through the 5s and 7s and 11s and things like that generally starts to get you feeling a little stronger with all the other conventional feels as well. It's something which I've found in my own playing and also in my own teaching. Anyway, I hope that's been useful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and please like and share the video. And I'll see you in the next one.